Ja, ik kan hier niet op surfen. Heeft jij hem op een stickje of zo? Ja, dan gaat het niet mee. Ja, moet ik het
€50 retour bij aankoop van een Philips docking of Bluetooth speaker. Kijk op philips.nl/acties en overtuig jezelf.
Met Spotify Premium is je muziek altijd bij je. Op al je toestellen en apparaten. Je kan alles streamen wat je wil, zonder reclames en met de beste geluidskwaliteit. Je kan zelfs nummers downloaden en offline beluisteren. Dus of je nou in de trein, het vliegtuig of gewoon thuis op de bank zit, je hebt altijd toegang tot de juiste muziek. Klik op de banner voor meer informatie.
zelf aan lopen klooien.
Oh, had ik er nog niet.
Het is een keynote. Ik heb een keynote gezet met... Keynote. 2 sept. Dat is de bovenste.
Dus die kan eruit. Dus deze.
En is het de bedoeling dat ze er zelf doorheen gaat?
Ja, ze klikt zelf door, maar ik zet hem aan.
Oh, oké, prima.
Ik zet hem voor iedereen.
Dan zal ik het even tegen haar zeggen dat het de bedoeling is dat ze dat zelf... Er staan namelijk nog een paar hele mooie foto's achter. Dus dan kan ze tijdens het spreken...
Maar er zit er nu niet in beeld. Waarom niet? Ik heb geen extensie. Oh, er staat hij misschien weer buiten het scherm. Dat deed hij net ook. Nee. Want deze is het niet.
Nee, het is de keynote.
Want ze had hem eerst in de PowerPoint gegeven.
Ja, en hij heeft hem opgeslagen als keynote.
Dan is daar iets misgegaan waarschijnlijk.
Ja.
Ik ga hem wel boven even ophalen.
Hij staat op de server.
Oké. Jammer dan.
Een paar regels in het Engels. Ik ga gewoon dus zitten. Ja, perfect. Ja, ja.
Het is dus nu 12 over. Ja.
Goedemorgen allemaal. Good morning to our foreign guest. Aan het begin van de Amsterdam Urban Innovation Week. Ik ben super blij dat jullie er zijn. Het is maandagochtend. Het is best nog wel vroeg. Maar jullie zijn hier om met ons deze week te beginnen, te starten. Het wordt een drukke week, een boeiende week. Ik hoop ook voor velen een inspirerende week, een informatieve week. We hebben een prachtig programma wat gaat over de stad. Over de stad in transitie. In ieder geval zo kijken wij op dit moment naar de stad. De stad waar heel veel systemen, modellen, vormen van samenwerking op dit moment behoorlijk onder druk staan. En waar wij nu al ruim 2 jaar hier in Pakhuis de Zwijger over aan het programmeren zijn. Het is een weerbarstige tijd, want er is een hoop aan het veranderen. Het is weerbarstig ook omdat het veel betekent voor mensen. Veel mensen in de stad staat hun baan onder druk. Of moeten ze iets anders gaan doen dan dat ze gewend waren. Dus het is spannend. Het is spannend om te kijken op zoek naar een nieuw evenwicht voor zaken. En dat is waarom we deze week georganiseerd hebben. Die hebben we als pakhuis uiteraard niet alleen georganiseerd. De belangrijkste partner is daarin Waag Society met het daaraan gelinkte picknick. Daar is het allemaal begonnen, het idee. En daaromheen hebben we een prachtige wolk met partners gevonden die deze week vorm en inhoud geven. Bijvoorbeeld al die partijen al dank voor al hun inzet. Want het is in een ongelooflijk korte tijd ook georganiseerd. En ik heb inmiddels een zin die ik regelmatig uitspreek omdat ik daarin geloof. Namelijk, klein is het nieuwe groot. En dat is in ieder geval al bewaarheid geworden in de organisatie van deze week. Want al die kleine partijen in de stad, die hebben allemaal een onderdeel of onderdeeltje in deze week tot zich genomen. En dan zie je dat er in een 3 maanden tijd een best heel mooi, interessant internationaal programma staat. De flyer hebben jullie allemaal voor je liggen. Je ziet dat het vol is. Het begint vanochtend en we eindigen zaterdag. En ik begin even achteraan, want het is voor mij meteen het opzetje naar iets wat ik jullie mee wil geven. Namelijk zaterdag zetten wij een punt achter deze week met een stadexpeditie. En het is niet zomaar een stadexpeditie, dat is een expeditie langs meer dan 120 initiatieven in de stad die wat je noemt bottom-up zijn ontstaan afgelopen 2-3 jaar. Dat zijn wijkondernemingen, dat zijn energiecoöperaties, dat zijn culturele collectieven, dat is zelfbouw, het is stadslandbouw. Het is een heel palet aan mensen in de buurten en wijken in de stad die gemeend hebben de afgelopen jaren van we gaan niet op een ander zitten wachten, we gaan het gewoon zelf doen. Al die partijen zijn hier over de afgelopen tijd in huis geweest en wij hebben ze allemaal uitgedaagd om op die zaterdag hun deuren open te zetten en mensen in de stad te ontvangen. Dus dat is de stadexpeditie. Kijk op de website AUIW.nl. Klik op de zaterdag en je ziet een kaart van Amsterdam met al die 120 stippen waar je langs kunt. En we hebben daar voor het gemak ook wat routes aangegeven. Een paar routes in Amsterdam-Noord, een paar routes in West, een paar routes in Oost en zo. Alle stadsdelen waar clusters van activiteiten zijn die meer dan de moeite waard zijn om zaterdag te bezoeken. Daaraan gelinkt. Hebben we nog iets anders gedaan deze zomer. Omdat al die programma's hier avond na avond, dag na dag voorbij komen, duizelt je het je af en toe wel eens. En ik persoonlijk had in ieder geval behoefte om aan al die vluchtigheid van de programma's en ook alles wat online daarover verschijnt, om daar in ieder geval iets tegen aan te zetten. Ik ben zelf een ongelofelijke liefhebber van blaadjes en magazines en kranten doorspitten. Ondanks alles wat ook met je iPad kan, koop ik nog met regelmaat gewoon lekkere stapels bij de boekhandel om daar in het weekend doorheen te bladeren. Ik dacht, daar ga ik gewoon iets tegenaan zetten, bovenop stapelen. Terwijl er heel veel titels omvallen, dacht ik, we gaan iets nieuws doen. Namelijk, we zijn in november afgelopen jaar, dus een klein jaar geleden, gestart met Stadlab Amsterdam. Het feit dat die stad in eigenlijk één groot experiment, één grote broedplaats is. Al die partijen op uitgenodigd en langzaam kristalliseert zich daar iets uit wat wij sinds kort Nieuw Amsterdam zijn gaan noemen. Het heeft ook nog ergens een connotatie met iets wat aan de andere kant van de wereld is gebeurd 400 jaar geleden. Maar dat terzijde. Nieuw Amsterdam. Voor ons idee is er een Nieuw Amsterdam aan het ontstaan. Zo hebben we een magazine genoemd, wat ik graag namens al onze medewerkers en het pakhuis en alles wat daar als partners bij betrokken is, graag wil presenteren vanochtend. Door in ieder geval een paar mensen op het podium te roepen, die allemaal exponent zijn van die beweging Nieuw Amsterdam. Ik wil beginnen met 7 van hen hier te vragen en de 8e komt als laatste. Tanja den Broeder, Floor Ziegler, Meluki, Chris, sorry hoor, Eltje Bos. Kom allemaal even op een barkruk zitten. Jurgen Hogendoorn. Volgens mij ben ik er een aardig intal, hè? 2, 4, wie vergeet ik nou nog? Floor, Tanja, Diane. Ja. Ga allemaal even op een kruk zitten. Ik had het net over Nieuw Amsterdam, stad in transitie. Jullie zijn gevraagd voordat je hier kwam, vorige week, om allemaal 1 superkorte uitspraak te doen wat voor jullie die stad in transitie uitmaakt. Diane.
Een inclusieve stad. Een stad waar iedereen aan mee kan doen. Een transitie waar iedereen aan mee kan doen. En dat betekent dat we knooppunten moeten ontwerpen, maken, met en voor die mensen die allemaal die grote beweging vormen die de stad verandert.
Wie ben je, Diane?
Ik ben Diane Krabbedam van de Beach.
En actief in?
En vooral actief in Amsterdam Nieuw-West, maar niet alleen in Nieuw-West.
Eltje.
Eltje Bos, Hogeschool van Amsterdam. Wat mij het meeste bezighoudt, de inspiratie en hoe en dat iedereen meedoet, inclusief, ja. Maar wie gaat nu bedenken hoe we ons tot elkaar moeten gaan verhouden in deze transitie? Want het is een enorme transitie. Wat doet het bestuur? Wat doen de burgers? Burgers zijn natuurlijk heel belangrijk. En wat doen de sociale professionals? En dat laatste, die leiden wij natuurlijk op. Daar zijn we heel erg aan het herdenken wat zij zouden moeten doen en hoe zij zich moeten gedragen. Ik sprak net met meneer uit Engeland. En die zeiden, ja, die social workers moeten zich anders opstellen. Bescheidener. Meer gericht naar wat zich voor hen afspeelt. Meer coaching, meer bescheiden. Ja.
Jurgen.
Jurgen Hogendoorn. Ik ben civil servant bij de gemeente Amsterdam. In de ruimtelijke hoek. En wat die transitie voor mij betekent is dat tijdelijk is het nieuwe permanent. We zijn gewend om alles voor hele lange tijd te ontwerpen en vast te leggen in regelgeving. Maar dat werkt allemaal niet meer. Het kraakt. En tijdelijk is het nieuwe permanent.
Chris Keulemans, ik heb er net weer een mooi lang weekend in de Tolhuistuin op zitten. Dus ik kan nog niet zo heel goed uit mijn ogen kijken, maar ik zie wel verandering. En ik dacht, het is eigenlijk een verandering. Dit is altijd een stad van men geweest. Dus men had bij een fonds nog wel een budgetje. Of achter dat loket had men nog wel iets voor je. Of men had op het stadhuis verzonnen dat dit of dat geregeld kon worden. Het wordt nu veel meer een stad van ons, noodgedwongen of niet. Dus bij ons kan je nog nieuwe dingen verzinnen. Of bij ons hebben we nog wel ruimte. Of ons weet je te vinden als je iemand nodig hebt. Dus het is een stad natuurlijk altijd van vechtlust en vindingrijke mensen. Maar ik denk dat jullie hier in de Zwijger precies te pakken hebben wat er gaande is op een heleboel plekken. Ons, meer dan men. Dat ons kan nog groter, heb ik hier ook wel eens gezegd. Wordt ook groter. Maar daar word ik dan wel weer wakker van. Ja.
Dankjewel. Tanja.
Goedemorgen. Ik ben Tanja den Broeder, platform EBE Amsterdam. Met de stadslandbouwinitiatieven bezig. Moestuinen, maar ook alweer een schaalvergroting aan de gang. De braakliggende gronden. Ze zijn er en ze zijn er ook heel veel. En hoe we dat met z'n allen kunnen waarnemen. En daar een civil society, een stad van ons, onze stad kunnen maken. Dat is nog een hele grote kunst. Dus kom je altijd naar de academie in Pakhuis de Zwijger om bij te leren met jullie, van jullie. En waar het mij om gaat is denk ik, wat we aan het doen zijn, we zijn aan het democratiseren, vastgoed, eigendom, geld, ons voedsel. Dat is wat mij inspireert. Dat zijn de soort slogans waar ik 's ochtends mee wakker word.
Floor.
Wauw, wat doen jullie dat allemaal geweldig, zegt jongen. Ik ben Floor Ziegler. Goedemorgen. Ik ben van de Noorderparkkamer, Broedstraten. Ik denk dat ik vooral de stad altijd in beweging zie. Volgens mij is dat altijd aan de hand zolang er mensen zijn. Ik was vorige week op een ouderavond. Dat ging over puberteit. En toen dacht ik, eigenlijk zitten we wel met z'n allen in een soort puberteit. Want we zijn opnieuw een identiteit aan het zoeken. We zijn ons aan het afzetten. De doeners zijn zich een beetje aan het afzetten tegen die systeemwereld. Maar die systeemwereld die moet ook loslaten. En dat moeten ouders natuurlijk ook. Dat is het engste wat er is. Dat je tegen je kinderen zegt, ga de wereld in. Loop risico's. Het kan misgaan. Dus dat is eigenlijk ook wat er nu gaande is. Maar wat ook belangrijk is, dat die ouders dus ook vertrouwen hebben. En dat ze snappen dat loslaten, dat het dan gebeurt, zeg maar. Dus, eigenlijk zijn we pubers met elkaar hier. En daarom zeggen we ook altijd, we gaan naar ons clubhuis. Wij gaan hier lekker zitten puberen met z'n allen en verbinding. Oh ja, dat is natuurlijk een van de belangrijkste dingen die op die ouderavond gezegd werd. Hou verbinding met die pubers, want anders gaat het wel mis. Je moet ze natuurlijk wel een beetje vasthouden. En die pubers hebben ook hulp nodig. Dus soms hebben ze geld nodig en soms hebben ze hun kleren nodig of een tas. En dat hebben wij ook als doeners. We hebben de gemeente wel nodig. Want puberen betekent loslaten, maar ook vasthouden. Verbinding.
Mooi, dank.
Meluki.
Dank. Meluki Kada. Wie ben ik? Ik ben een Nieuw Amsterdammer in Nieuw Amsterdam. Actief burger. In de breed zou ik zeggen, want zowel de Makassarplein community, de Indische buurt community, dan bestuurslid van de huurdersvereniging Amsterdam. En voor mij Amsterdam in de transitie, dat is dan een utopie. En dat is een mooie droom die wij met elkaar bouwen. Hier zijn wij deze week. Bouwen wij aan wat ik noem dan crossovers. Ik vind het heel belangrijk dat op zaterdag al die deuren open gaan. Dus ga vooral naar plekjes waar je nooit bent geweest. Doe een crossover. En ik ben ervan overtuigd dat wat wij doen en wat wij ook met Pakhuis de Zwijger doen, kan verandering aanbrengen. Dus wij zijn gezamenlijk in een stad in transitie die streeft naar een utopie. We zijn samen changemakers, dat zijn wij.
Maar niet te ver weg, hè, die utopie.
Noem een aantal jaren.
Oké. Dank jullie wel. Nu missen we nog één partij aan tafel. Namelijk de bestuurder van die stad van ons, Freek Ossel. Freek, volgens mij heb je hier een palet met fantastische stadmakers zitten. Stadmakers van een stad van ons. Jij bent bestuurder van die stad. Je hoort de oproep doorklinken, loslaten, ruimte geven, samen optrekken, meewerken. We hebben er deze zomer een magazine over gemaakt. Om alles wat in de stad gaande is zichtbaar te maken. Dat zijn niet alleen de door jou aangejaagde wijkondernemingen, maar er gebeurt heel veel meer in die stad, wat allemaal met elkaar te maken heeft. Ik wil jou het eerste exemplaar overhandigen, maar tegelijkertijd ook aan hen. Namelijk hen die van die stad van ons zijn, samen met jou, want we doen het samen en wij hebben jullie nodig en jullie hebben ons nodig. Freek, alsjeblieft.
Dankjewel, goed. Jessie.
Echt, Bert, zal ik wat zeggen? Gaat dit zo hier? Ja. En weer een publicatie erbij. Fantastisch. Ik vind het echt heel belangrijk, want er zijn weinig dingen, dat realiseren jullie ook, waar ook zoveel misverstanden over bestaan als de zaken waar jullie mee bezig zijn. De vooroordelen zijn legio, geitenwolle sok, innovatie voor jezelf, subsidieslurpers, om het even positief te houden. En er zijn ook een heleboel positieve connotaties van dit is het nieuwe, hier komt het alleen vandaan, wij gaan het allemaal doen. Beide is natuurlijk niet helemaal waar. En ik denk dat dit soort magazines, waar Egbert en zijn club aan heeft gewerkt, en deze hele week trouwens, echt gaat helpen om dat ook nog beter voor elkaar te krijgen met elkaar. Want die misverstanden zijn niet terecht, daarom is het ook een misverstand, denk ik. Waar ik geloof is, Egbert, het is terecht wat je zegt. Ik ben sterk bezig met de wijkaanpak en die gaat ook over sociale ondernemingen. En mijn grote opgave is, hoe kan ik nou ervoor zorgen dat die plekken waar het moeilijk gaat in de stad, er zijn een stuk of 8 plekken die we hebben uitgezocht, er zijn misschien 9 of meer, maar datgene wat jullie doen, daar ook een soort aansluiting op vindt. Dat moet niet een soort beleid zijn van een plannetje wat je maakt. Af en toe dan komt het bij elkaar. Bij Floor komt het bij elkaar, bij Chris komt het bij elkaar. Het hoeft niet altijd, maar als het bij elkaar komt, kan het enorm krachtig zijn. En wat jullie dus ook moeten weten, dat krijg je met bestuurders, die gaan jou wat vertellen. Wat jullie ook moeten weten is dat er ook heel veel initiatieven zijn, kleine dingen, die op zich heel bijzonder zijn. Ik was jongsleden vrijdag in de Vensterpolder. Ik weet niet of jullie dat kennen, Zuidoost. Een van de meest onbekende stukjes in Zuidoost. Een van de meest vervelende stukjes ook trouwens van Zuidoost. Anders dan de Bijlmer. En daar is een multibron. Klinkt als een winkel in water, maar multibron is een soort buurtkamer waar mensen bij elkaar zitten, waarbij ook een professional zit die moet loslaten. En die over een jaartje, dan heeft hij misschien 2 uur daar te gaan. En dan is de bedoeling dat mensen die daar in de buurt wonen gewoon ook dingen opzetten. Dat combineren met mensen die met zorg helpen, met armoede. En het zou ongelooflijk mooi zijn als die groep die daar zit ook een combinatie kan krijgen met wat er verder gebeurt. Misschien op Heesterveld of noem maar op. En dat is geen idealisme, maar daardoor wordt het alle twee sterker. Daar ben ik echt van overtuigd. Dat is een voorbeeld. Een ander voorbeeld is Tanja, waar we mee bezig zijn met de voedselvisie. Zo'n voedselvisie, ja, leuk rapportje, mooi, de overheid geeft weer wat. Maar waar we natuurlijk willen, is dat wij loslaten, met iets waar we nog niet eens aan begonnen zijn, maar dat moeten we ook loslaten. En tegelijkertijd moeten wij er ook voor zorgen dat we jullie faciliteren, dat we het mogelijk maken. En de slechtste manier om het te faciliteren is om een subsidieregeling, hoe noemen we dat, stadslandbouw te maken of dat soort enge dingen. Dat moeten we dus niet doen. Maar wat dan wel? En daar moet ik gewoon eerlijk in zijn, daar zoeken wij gewoon naar. Dus Eltje heeft helemaal gelijk. Wij zoeken naar wat de beste manier is. En een overheid die denkt heel vaak heel digitaal. Of je laat los, nou doe het dan maar. Hè? Of je gaat erop zitten, wat is het plan? Vertel me even. En voordat je het weet krijg je het woord business case. En dan weet je dat je erin zit ongeveer. Dus wij zoeken naar nieuwe manieren om dat te doen. En daar hebben we jullie dus ook bij nodig. Daar moeten we af en toe in experimenteren. En dan moeten jullie van ons weten dat we in een situatie zitten waarbij wij gekozen zijn. Ook af en toe verantwoording moeten afleggen aan allerlei groepen. En tegelijkertijd willen we ook meehelpen. Dus soms zetten we de ene pet op en soms de andere pet op. En als ik maar vertel welke pet ik op heb, dan moet het lukken. Ik geloof heel sterk dat innovatie kan en nodig is, juist in tijden van crisis, Egbert. En ik vind het ontzettend belangrijk wat jullie doen hier met deze innovatieweek opzetten, maar überhaupt de rol die jullie vervullen. Het is wat Floor zegt, het is steeds meer een soort clubhuis. Sommige clubhuizen houden niet van, maar deze vinden we echt wel heel erg oké. Dus bedankt daarvoor en bedankt voor deze mooie publicatie. Dankjewel.
Jullie allemaal bedankt. We hopen jullie niet alleen vandaag hier te zien, maar de hele week door. En we komen ook jullie kant op, dus volgende week zaterdag. Spreek ze aan als je wat van ze moet. Straks in de pauze is er voor jullie allemaal zo'n magazine. En we gaan nu echt beginnen met de Amsterdam Urban Innovation Week. Bart Krul.
Yes, also on my behalf, a very, very warm welcome here at Pakhuizen Zwijger. My name is Bart Krul from the Instituut Maatschappelijke Innovatie, Institute for Social Innovation. And we're here to celebrate, the start of the Amsterdam Urban Innovation Week. I have a feeling it's going to be a very exciting week, and today is going to be no exception. The title for today is Power to the People. So we're focusing on that movement in which citizens take the initiative to shape their own environments, to shape their own neighborhoods, without waiting for governments or permits or other official institutions, and really, take the initiative. Egbert just highlighted that it's not just a very happy story, because there is a crisis going on, as you all are probably aware of. And that also gives us very relevant questions on how worthwhile is this new development, and is this movement able to include everybody, or is it really just a few pioneers who make up new systems or models and make that work. But in what ways is really worthwhile? So those are really interesting questions we're focusing on today. Let us have a quick look at the program. If it's on the screen. Yes, there we are. Because right after my introduction, we will have it's going to be a column or more of an analysis, really, Albert-Jan, on what this new movement is going to be like. It's going to be very in a new way, because you're on the sheet with the camera on, so everybody can clearly see what Albert-Jan's analysis is. Then we have a wide range of international guests, and we are really happy that they're here. There are a few of them over here and over here. Coming from India, from Germany, 2 of them from Spain, and 2 of them from the UK, and they are giving us their insights, their highlights on their projects and their initiatives. So I think you're very lucky in a way to be able to hear their stories. And please, if you feel like asking a question or sharing an insight yourselves, raise your hand, so I'll be coming with the mic to you to have that interaction right away. They will take us to lunch, and right after lunch we will focus on the special connection between education and society's challenges, either from the secondary school perspective and from the hogeschool perspective. That's translated as University of Applied Sciences. So these are 2 angles we'll take on that connection between education and the movement we're talking about. And then we have 3 parallel sessions in the afternoon, 1 in English and 2 in Dutch. The English one will focus on the lessons from Mondragon. It's going to be English, and it's going to be hosted by our guest from Mondragon, so we're really happy that you take that role. The second one is going to be hosted by Hetty Politiek. Maatschappelijke impact van wijkondernemingen is going to be in Dutch. I'll be shortly in Dutch for you. Hosted by Hetty Politiek. She's responsible for neighborhood approach within the municipality of Amsterdam. And the third one is going to be about de publieke zaak op zijn kop, where we focus on traditional sectors that were traditionally in government hands, energy, care, and see what, insurance also, and we'll see what that movement can do in those domains, in those fields. That will take us to around about the clock of 5 o'clock. Then we have a wrap-up, but not before we have a column by Professional Rebel. I'm really interested in what they're going to do and what they're going to say. Maybe, we'll see what that brings. And then it is a bit after 5 o'clock, and then we have a drink downstairs and look back on what the day has given us, and maybe also look forward on the rest of the week. That's it for my introduction. Once more, very happy that you're all here, and please raise your voice either after the presentations this morning, and especially in the parallel sessions this afternoon. So you're very much invited to do so. And I would like to give the floor to Albert-Jan Kuyter from the Instituut Publieke Waarden, Institute of Public Values.
A whiteboard is used as a major breakthrough innovation in these times of PowerPoint presentations and prezzies, and I'd just like to draw instead of read a column to you. My name is Albert-Jan Kuyter. I've been asked to give you a little bit of context on the Dutch welfare state, actually. And as you're probably aware, the Dutch welfare state is one of the most traditional and most successful welfare states in the world. But unfortunately, we cannot pay for it anymore. It's become too expensive. Traditionally, the Dutch welfare state was rooted in civil society. Actually, our most famous symbol, you probably visited here in Amsterdam, the Night Watch, Rembrandt's painting, are actually the guys that are painted there are citizens, and they are troubled with public safety in Amsterdam. And they started an initiative to take care of public safety. And we have lots of examples traditionally, but in 1814-8, 1848, a guy named Thorbecke almost single-handedly drafted our constitution. And from that time on, we actually saw government taking responsibility for public problems. And the more government did that, the more citizens neglected public problems, actually. Well, I'm a scholar of a guy that's named Elasis de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville, you probably know him, a French philosopher born in 1805. And he was one of the guys that actually stressed the importance of citizen involvement in modern democracies. And he went to America in 1831 because he said, well, all philosophers before me, they thought about democracy, but they never actually seen it. And in America, we have actual democracy now, so I will go there to study it. And when he arrived, he got confused because he talked with the Americans about what is this democracy, etc., etc. And then he found out that every single person he talked to had his own definition of democracy. Every person he talked to defined democracy in another way, added different values to democracy, appreciated democracy in different ways. So the first thing he did was actually he said, if we want to have a decent, productive discussion about democracy, we should differentiate between democratic government and democratic society. Democratic government, democratic society. And he studied democracy and he talked to people, and his research went on for 20, 30 years. But based on his experience in America, he said, well, what we see in America is very peculiar. America first was a democratic society, because when the Europeans arrived there was no state, there was no government, there were no rules and regulations. America first was a democratic society, and a democratic government grew out of it. While we in Western Europe, in France, but also in the Netherlands, UK, governments were already in place. We had the kings with their policymakers and their rules and regulations. So he said, where America first was a democratic society that grew a democratic government, Europe first had a democratic government that tried to build a democratic society. It's a crucial difference, because Tocqueville teaches us, without democratic culture, without democratic society, democratic institutions are useless. And he made a prediction at the end of his life. He told us, well, when we speak of democratic government, his prediction would be that democratic governments would centralize and bureaucratize. So it said the core characteristics of democratic government are centralization and bureaucracy. And he said another thing. He said, democratic society, the people will individualize. Actually, the term individualism was introduced in the English language and in the Dutch language due to a translation of this book of Tocqueville, Democratie in Amerika. So he would say, democratic society will individualize. And the two will correlate. Because the more a centralized government will solve public problems, the more the people will individualize. And the more the people will individualize, the more central government will feel responsible for solving public problems. And he predicted that at one certain moment, we could not pay for this situation anymore. Because people would neglect public problems, and government would be the only one responsible. And at that moment, Tocqueville said democracy stops to exist. Well, in Dutch, society in the Dutch welfare state is not here, but we were on our way. I would say we were here. If central government didn't act in 2020, Dutch people would pay 20 to 30% of their income to healthcare costs, for instance. So we had to do something. The reaction of Dutch central government for the past 5 to 10 years was, okay, we don't want to be centralized bureaucracy anymore, and we don't want to have individuals. What we need is citizens. And what we need is local communities. Of course, the local communities were already in place. We have a city hall here in Amsterdam. But compared to other European countries, the Netherlands are the least decentralized country we know, except for Malta. And Malta doesn't have any communities, so we're the least decentralized country we know when it comes to fiscal autonomy. So when it comes to what can a local community decide for itself, when it comes to attributing resources, we are the least decentralized. At the same time, the Netherlands almost has the highest number of local civil servants per capita. That means we have very big, large local communities and city halls that have not a lot of autonomy. So what the central government did is saying, well, what we like to do is give the local government the responsibility for budget cuts when it comes to youth care, when it comes to society care, when it comes to welfare. We make local communities responsible and we give them less budget than we had before. And the only way local government can do this is to transform individualists into citizens. This is the transition we're going through currently in Holland. But the problem is, we don't know how to do this. We don't have no knowledge, we as a society, how to solve common problems in common. Because government has been doing this for the past 30, 40 years, maybe. To give you an idea, up to 3 years ago, government was paying grandparents with taxpayers' money to watch their own grandchildren. This is how centralized and bureaucratized the Dutch government was. Now we have to do everything ourselves, at least that's the idea. But we don't have no knowledge, there's a knowledge gap. Everything we know is based on growth. So the question is, what to do? Of course, we also looked to the UK, to other countries, and Mr. Blunt was a guest in this country quite a few times, and his analysis in a nutshell, of course, was we tried big government and it failed. We tried big market and it failed too. So what we try now is big society, and it will probably fail as well. Also, if we try it here in the Netherlands, because of course we need all these three powers. So what are these powers exactly? What can the market do better than society and government? Work efficiently. Efficiency. What can government do better than market and society? Provide justice, the rule of law. And what can society do better than market and government? Create involvement. If a fellow citizen asks me to help him, I'd be more happy to than the local government asks me to help my fellow citizen. So we have three values here: efficiency, justice, and involvement. Justice in terms of social inclusion. Efficiency in terms of scarce resources. Also, in the res publica, also in the public domain, resources are always, by definition, scarce. And the more efficiently we allocate them, the more problems we can solve. So efficiency is a very important value, also in these times. And involvement in terms of how many citizens participate, actually. But all these three domains also tend to exclude people. For justice, you need rules and regulations and protocols. Protocols will exclude people that don't fit the protocol. In the Netherlands now we ended up in a situation that people that need care the most are excluded as one of the first by these protocols because they have become too expensive. We call this an entry-exit paradox. So you have projects for young people with behavioral problems. So they're entitled to enter these projects for young people with behavioral problems. And they are kicked out because they have behavioral problems. We have debt relief programs for people that are in debt. They're entitled to enter these programs and they're kicked out again because they keep borrowing money. We have shelters and hospitals for addicted people. They're entitled to enter them, but they are kicked out because they keep using drugs. So people that need care the most are excluded by protocols. That's the downside of government. The market, of course, will typically also exclude people that are not profitable. This is the market mechanism. They have to make a profit. There has to be a profit to be made. So the market excludes probably the same people because they're not profitable. And what society does, society excludes as well, of course. The biggest taboo of the network society is that the network only includes people that add value to the network. That typically means that people that do not add value to the network are excluded. So exclusion, inclusion is one of the biggest challenges of citizen power. I want to end with this. What we've seen in the past 10, 20, maybe 30 years, that government has relied, I will draw this again. If you cannot read it, it's not the size, it's just my handwriting. Big government, big society, big market. What we've seen in the past decennia is that government relied heavily on market mechanisms and on citizens. Up to now, governments tend to see citizens as policy instruments. In the French Revolution, the whole idea was for citizens to see government as an instrument. So something went wrong. Government relied heavily on citizens and markets to solve public problems. In the meantime, especially the last 5 years, markets rely heavily on governments and citizen involvement to make a profit. Banks cannot survive anymore without subsidies. I think the real challenge is for big society to make government and market work for society as well. They've done it. They've done it. Now it's time for big society to include these values. Social justice, efficient attribution of scarce resources, and to create public value. That can be one of the major challenges for the years to come. So my challenge for you all will be this week, the question will be how to include market mechanisms, how to include rules and regulations, how to direct them out of a civil society, and how to create public value, especially in terms of inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Albert-Jan. Stay with us for just another minute because I'm really curious for a short reaction by the municipality of Amsterdam, Het Politiek. You're responsible for the neighborhood approach. Did you hear anything in Albert Jan's analysis that you feel is inspiring you or you could use in your own work?
Well, the center calls the public values, and before this part of the program, you heard six people who are trying to create new public values in the neighborhoods. And you also heard elderly man who says, well, how do you do it? I think the focus of all those three bullets is the new public values. And we are merely in the struggle to make it quicker. I think in Holland we don't much feel any urge. I think we have to push a little harder to get the urge how to get the new identity of those public values. And property takes 4 or 5 years or maybe 6. And I think maybe we can do it in Holland a bit quicker than 6 years. Go, go, go.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Don. So you're really inspired for that urge that you're, yeah, okay. Well, Albert Jan, short reaction?
Yeah, I totally agree. It should always go quicker and faster. And after all, we are the citizens. I mean, this is our government. In the end, it's our market. So I totally agree. But what we see when it comes to citizen initiatives, I see citizen initiatives that are really efficient and make a profit. But they exclude people that are not profitable. I see citizen initiatives that include people that are excluded elsewhere, but that need government subsidies. So these values are very hard to combine. The more efficient you work, the harder it is to include people that are excluded elsewhere. And my advice is to speed it all up. It's not to strive for 10 out of 10 points here, 10 out of 10 points there, and 10 out of 10 points there, because it's not possible. If you are 7 out of 10 here, when it comes to inclusion, 7 out of 10 points when it comes to involvement, and 7 out of 10 when it comes to efficiency, you're a very, very, very good project.
Okay. Thanks a lot once again. Albert Jan Kuiter from the Instituut Publieke Waarde. The next person I'd like to invite on the floor is Steve Clare from Locality. He's the Deputy Chief Executive over there. Background from a mining community in the northeast of England, graduated from Cambridge University and has been connected to Locality since 2005, I believe. Yes. And you're going to speak from your UK experience. So, well, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
For the next 25 minutes.
Great.
Yes, give him a hand, please. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I'm really happy to be here. Amsterdam is a city for which I have much admiration, but I think more specifically, what I really admire is some of the new thinking and innovation that's happening in Amsterdam. And I think the Urban Innovation Week is a wonderful development, so congratulations on that. I want to just tell you a little about Locality to start with. We're a membership organisation. We've got roots going back to the late 19th century and a long history of campaigning around social action and social justice. Nowadays, we focus particularly on community asset ownership, community asset transfer, transferring underused public assets into the community ownership so they can be transformed and used for the benefit of the community, underpinned by enterprise, by community enterprise. And we're the recognised national experts in the UK on this agenda. And in the last 5 years, we've worked with about 1,000 different community groups and about 2/3 of local authorities in England, because we see community ownership as an important route towards independence from political pressure and financial sustainability. Across the UK, we have it's about 750 members, and they own almost £850 million. That's almost €1 billion in assets. And it's focused on creating wealth within communities and keeping that wealth circulating, staying in the communities so that local people benefit. And our members, some of them are large. I'll give some examples soon. Some of them are small, some are rural, some are urban. But between them, they employ about 5,500 people, and they work with about 25,000 volunteers. And what they have in common is shared values and a shared belief in the communities in which they exist. And they're all community-owned, they're all accountable to their local communities. And they're using community ownership and community enterprise to tackle poverty, deprivation, and social exclusion. And another key characteristic, they work in partnership. They work in partnership with local councils and with the private sector. So that's an introduction, a bit of context, a bit of politics. A lot of what was said by the previous speaker sounded very familiar to me coming from the UK. I agree that I think in Europe we're seeing the beginning of a massive change. The social contract that existed in the second half of the 20th century is falling apart, the welfare state. The model that we had of an ever-increasing economy, ever-increasing tax take, and ever-increasing spend in public services is broken, and I don't think that's coming back. And as a result, there are some fundamental questions being asked about the relationship between the state and the citizen, between the state and community, about who is responsible for what and who does what. In the UK, perhaps, we've been seen as being at the forefront of tackling some of those issues, but I think they are being asked across Europe. Now, in the UK, we've seen some of this reflected in legislation. The previous speaker mentioned big society. And the idea behind big society, a lot of it's quite positive. A lot of it is about mobilizing citizens to support each other, about engaging people in decision-making. But you know, in the UK now, nobody mentions big society. You never hear government ministers talking about big society. It's lost all credibility because it's been used as a cover, as an excuse for cutting public funding, particularly funding to the poorest and most vulnerable. Instead, we hear about localism. And again, localism is about devolving responsibility, devolving decision-making to the lowest possible level. Great in theory. It's about empowerment. And that's been enshrined in legislation. There's a series of community rights. Prime amongst these is the community right to build, which gives local communities the opportunity to develop new houses or new workshops or new community facilities that they want to do, irrespective of the local planning authority or the local council. Local people decide what happens in their community. There's also the community right to bid. This is about protecting community assets, public and private, assets, buildings, land that are important to communities. And this legislation means you can list an asset on a register, and the owner can't sell it without having a 6-month moratorium to allow the community to put forward an alternative to raise the money to buy it themselves. And thirdly, the community right to challenge. This allows communities to say, we can run a public service better than a local authority. And the service can then be put out to tender to allow a community group to deliver the service for themselves. Although there is a sting in the tail. When that goes out to tender, the private sector can also bid. And that's a real worry. Now, these community rights have made a difference. It's early days. Locality runs a national support service around advice and support on these community rights. And we've dealt with over 6,000 inquiries in just over a year. There's over 400 community assets have been listed, so they have some degree of protection against being sold off. There are other community rights as well. We have something called neighbourhood planning, and at the moment 600 communities across England are developing, through consultation with local people, their idea, their vision of how they want their communities to be developed, about new housing and new workplaces and so on. And what they come up will have the force of law. Other experiments are going on. We had a pilot program of neighbourhood community budgeting based very loosely on the model that was developed in Brazil, and subsequently has been tried and tested in the USA and other parts of Europe. I know it's being talked about in Amsterdam as well. And this is being rolled out over the next year in the UK. And much of this is very positive. It gives the opportunity for co-design of services, for users, for communities to work with local authorities, local councils, to design services that are fit for purpose and actually meet the needs of the people using those services. It gives the opportunity to break down contract sizes. We're having a long discussion, argument, debate, row in the UK at the moment. Government believes in economies of scale. Economies of scale work if you're making pins or bits of machinery. Economies of scale does not work when you're delivering services to people. Diseconomies of scale happen when you have huge contracts trying to deal with individuals in localities. And actually often services are not just better, but cheaper and more efficient if they're delivered locally and are responsive to local need. So this legislation has created debate. It's been a catalyst for collaboration. It's encouraged local thinking. It's been a step forward, yeah. And parallel to that, there's been other developments, stuff you'll be familiar with. Social finance. We were involved in setting up two of the biggest in England, the social investment business and the Key Fund. Government set up Big Society Capital, a social finance wholesaler, that used £600 million from dormant bank accounts to put into the social finance market. We also co-run something called the Community Shares Unit, and there's been a huge increase in the number of community share issues as communities raise money through this mechanism. And there's been over 100 community share issues in the past year, raising about £9 million. And again, something you'll be familiar with, crowdfunding. We're a partner with Space Hive, raising money for small environmental improvements within communities. They have created change. Some examples here. The top picture is Hastings Pier on the south coast, an iconic building in the town of Hastings. It was owned by a mysterious offshore company registered in Panama, and it was falling apart. And there was a long campaign to force the compulsory purchase of this pier. And eventually, Community One, they put together a package, since then, a £10 million package of community share income, of social finance, of grant aid, to take over, and they're now refurbishing that pier, and it's going to create jobs. It's important to the pride and the sense of worth of that community. And it's given people confidence to start doing other projects in the town, redeveloping other redundant buildings, setting up other businesses. The picture bottom left, you'll all have heard of Manchester United, the football club. When it was taken over in 2005 by American speculators, a lot of fans objected. They felt the club was being taken away from them. And they set up an alternative called FC United of Manchester, which is currently top of its own league. In a couple of years' time, is probably going to be in the Football League itself. But they set it up by the fans, and they set up a community share issue and raised £3 million to build their own ground and their own community facilities. And that is a genuinely community-owned football club. And that picture behind me is one of the first beneficiaries of the community right to bid. It's a pub in South London called the Ivy House Pub. And the chain of the big business chain that owned it was going to sell it off. The local community said, no, we're listing it. And they managed to block the sale for 6 months. And it gave them a chance to raise £750,000, about 800,000 euros. £145,000 of that was through community shares. And they were able to buy that pub. And it's now a thriving business serving the local community. So that sounds good. It sounds positive. But, and it's a big but, not all communities are equal. Not all communities are able to take advantage of the rights in this legislation. Not all communities have got the same experience, the same resources, the same access to capital. And it's particularly the poorer and more disadvantaged and more excluded communities that are less likely to take advantage of this legislation. And the danger is where services are not replaced by community-delivered services, they will get replaced by private sector services. Lowest cost, driving standards down, which we've seen elsewhere. But I also want to emphasize that these things don't need legislation to make them happen. I mentioned earlier that we have all sorts of members, big, small, but I want to just look at two of our larger members, which was set up long before Big Society was talked about, which was set up long before this legislation was set up. Coin Street in London. If you know London, you stand at the Houses of Parliament and you look across the river, there's the London Eye, a big wheel, one of the big tourist attractions. If you look to the left of that, everything to the left of that is owned by a community organisation. They own 13 acres, which is about 55,000 square metres. And in that land, on that site, they have 4 housing cooperatives, including some that are 5-bedroomed, almost unheard of in that area. They have their own community centre, they have a children's centre, they run their own bus service for local residents. They own the Oxford Tower, another landmark in London, and all the retail units around it, shops, art spaces, studios. They run festivals. Their turnover is about 10 or 11 million euro a year. Their assets about 40 million euro. And that's only the beginning. They've got permission to develop a 40-story block of flats, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a new headquarters for a dance company, Ballet Rambert. That's a community organisation owned and managed by local people with the ambition to take on challenges of that nature. And another one, a member of ours, Goodwin Development Trust. It's based in Hull, a city on the East Coast. It's based in a huge social housing estate. 5,000 people live in this social housing estate. It's one of the most deprived estates in the whole of England. The board of this organisation is 100% residents. No lawyers, no accountants, no special this, special that. It's run by local people. They own 14 buildings. They're the biggest employer in the city outside of the public sector. They employ over 300 people, more than any private sector in the employer in the city. Normally, community groups rent space off the local authority, off the council. The council rents space off them. They're an amazing organisation. But what really excites me about development, this development trust, for example, is their ambition. There's a bridge across the River Humber, which goes into Hull, the Humber Bridge. When it was built, it was the biggest suspension bridge in the world. It's still one of the biggest in Europe. This community group tried to buy it. They put a package together of £100 million using private finance, 110 million euro, and tried to buy the Humber Bridge, because they thought communities should be owning infrastructure as well as community centres and small local things. They were thinking big because of the impact that bridge had on the local economy, on local jobs and local services. Because you have to pay to cross the bridge, and that raises prices. That was a step too far for government, but the response of this community organisation was, okay, let's see if we can buy the local telecom company for 340 million. And I love that sort of ambition. It shows what is possible, a different way of doing things. Now, are these people special? Of course they're special. Is the organisation special? Of course it's special. Is it different to any other community? No, I don't think it is. Because I think everybody, every community has the potential to be special if they believe that they can do something. And these people have had the belief that they can be ambitious and make things happen. So what's the learning from this? Well, ultimately, I want change. I agree with that. I don't think change is coming from big government. In the UK, all three major political parties accept austerity as the only way forward. None of them have got an alternative. I don't think government has the money to drive significant change, and I don't think it has the legitimacy in many of the disadvantaged communities. I don't know what it's like in this country, but in the UK, people do not trust politicians. And the level of trust has been getting lower and lower and lower. Legislation doesn't make things happen. People do. So for me, the starting point, the future, the starting point is actually at the neighbourhood level. I think that's the building block, that's the foundation for long-term change. Because it's at the neighbourhood level that you can mobilise people, you can harness the talents that exist. It's at the neighbourhood level you can build problem-solving ventures with public and private allies. It's at the neighbourhood level you can provide community stewardship of land and buildings and services. And it's at the neighbourhood level you can build community pride, self-determination and ambition. Now, community-led community organisations might seem small in the overall scheme of things, but I think it's a mistake to underestimate the potential of communities to change the world, even if it's one neighbourhood at a time. Today, we have civic and social entrepreneurs across the world, armed with innovative thinking and a willingness to tackle some of our most pressing, challenging social problems. And they're tapping into a powerful energy and sense of purpose, something that you'll see the glimmerings of here in Amsterdam as I do in London. And these new approaches are shattering traditional policy approaches and replacing them with something much more creative, more solution-focused, and developing new partnerships to produce dramatic results. For me, what's really exciting and what's really new is that communities can now connect horizontally. We can connect across cities, across countries, across the European Union, with the United States, with Australia, with Asia. People are beginning to exercise power in different ways. In South America, community budgeting, with the solidarity economy movement. You're looking at Seoul, which is trying to set itself up as a social enterprise city. Over 1,000 social enterprises created in 2 years. You're looking at initiatives like crowdsourcing, drawing on the collective wisdom of people. This, for me, is really interesting and really exciting because the key common factor is the more local the theme, the more level the playing field becomes. We all understand and we all have something to offer about our neighbourhoods, our local open spaces and our high streets because people care about where they live. And I think it's at that local level that genuine collective intelligence can be achieved, generating outcomes beyond what can be achieved by government or by individuals alone. So I'll just end by saying that this localist approach, this bottom-up approach, it isn't going to solve all the problems of the world, yet. It doesn't challenge the power of multinationals or of big government, yet. But it does offer glimpses of a different way of doing things. And who could disagree that we need a different way of doing things as we move forward into the 21st century? Because as sure as hell, the old way of doing things hasn't worked. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve Clare. If you would stay on me on stage for just a short period. Thanks a lot for your analysis and your presentation. You concluded with saying, well, it hasn't challenged the bottom-up movement, hasn't challenged the multinationals yet, the governments yet. Do you feel that's coming? And would you care or dare to make a prediction on when it's going to be really challenging to those organizations?
I'd love to be standing here calling for revolution. I don't think it's going to happen, not in the way we all used to think about it. I do think fundamental change has to come. I think government in Europe is no longer fit for purpose, the way it works. The hierarchical, the top to bottom way it works, I just don't think it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work when people are communicating horizontally. It doesn't work when you've got concepts like crowdsourcing and horizontal communication coming in. There's a different way. There's a much more dynamic option available in terms of engaging people in decision making. And I think it has to change. There will be resistance. It'll take time, but it will change.
Does it also mean you will need to see more of a fighting mentality within the social initiatives than the sort of embracing everybody's happy sort of mentality? I'm not saying that's always there, but do you need that fighting mentality to make that change?
One of the points I was trying to make in my presentation is that legislation has helped to create space for communities to do things. But those things were happening beforehand. And they happened because people would not take no for an answer. They happened because people said, we're not satisfied with what's happening in our communities. We want to do something about it. We want to make things change. And I actually think that collective struggle, if you want, within communities, people uniting around what's important to them, is much more important than legislation. Legislation helps, of course it helps. But unless people care and work together and have a shared vision of change, then I think it won't be sustainable.
Okay. Steve Clare, thanks a lot once again.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is from India, and we're really happy she's here. Karen Nazareth, please come with me on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen. She's executive director from the sept Charitable Trust from Ahmedabad, India. I looked it up. It's a few hundred kilometers above Mumbai. It's on the west side of India. And you're focusing on the people living in slums in Ahmedabad and in Gujarat and Rajasthan provinces. So that's really quite a large area. Yes. I'm really interested in what you're going to tell us. And we have some questions afterwards, and then we have a short coffee break. So, Karen, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I think considering we're talking about Europe and I'm coming all the way from India, we're a country of 1 billion people and more. And we've been working in urban slums. My organization is called sept, and sept means together. The word means to be together. We've been working for the past 24 years in urban slums, largely in the western state of Gujarat. And India has about 93 million people living in urban slums. So we're dealing with a very, very large issue, volumes, numbers, etc. But today what I want to share with you is what we've been able to do with communities in slums to help them change the way governments look at them, the way governments respond to them, and the way the private sector has responded to them as well. So I'm going to talk about a program that we've done. We started in 1989, so the idea is that the journey is a long one. It's not something that can happen overnight. And when we started working with communities, we realized that you cannot work with communities without building community-based organizations. We cannot, as external people, come into a community and say, we're going to bring the change. So we started building communities mostly with women, because they are the most disempowered, young people who want to be heard but have no platforms, especially in slums. And our first community-based organization was made up of all women. It's called Sakhi. Sakhi means friend. And we still, till today, the organization exists and works in the community. Why did we build the community organization? When we went into a community, we realized people don't want to talk to us. There's a lot of disconnect. There's not a lot of belief that people coming in, civil society coming in, wants to make change and wants to make change for people. So when we started building these community-based organizations, we started small projects, vaccination, small classes. They were very project-based. But it built enough belief that people started realizing that we want to help bring change. The first thing that we did was a survey in an area to see what were the biggest issues that a person in a slum deals with. Now, if you have ever been to India or if you've heard of slums, the biggest problem is that the land is not theirs. They are what we call squatters or people who've encroached on land, but they've been living there for over 30 to 40 to 50 years in some cases. Now, what happens in a slum is that the government will allow you to stay there for as long as it doesn't care about the land, and as soon as the land starts becoming important, you are going to be evicted. But the municipality doesn't give any services. So there's no water, there's no drainage, there's nothing there. So along with the fact that there is very poor education, there are no health facilities. On top of that, if you don't have basic services like water, lights, roads, you're already disadvantaged beyond everyone else. So we started thinking of how could we help a community get basic services like water, drainage, street lights into these areas on which the land is not theirs. And that's how we came up with a program called the Slum Networking Project. This was the first time in India when an organization was telling the government that we will get money from the people to pay for the services, but you need to ensure that they get the services. So it was the first project where we tied up with a company and the government and the people's organization. So it's called the Public-Private Partnership, PPP model. And how it worked was the government used to do these schemes. So government will put out schemes because our government is a welfare state. So it would put out a scheme saying, if a poor person wanted to build a toilet in their house, then 80% of the funding would come from the government and 20% is something that they'd have to put in. But people weren't accessing that because people didn't know of the scheme. If they knew of it, they didn't have the appropriate documentation. So they were losing out on all angles. Then there were other schemes that the government had come in terms of building infrastructure, not necessarily in slums. So we went to the government and we said, why don't you all start creating some sort of a package where we could get slum dwellers to pay 10% of the money for that infrastructure and you put in the rest. So initially the government wasn't keen, so we went to a company and the company said, all right, but you'll have to do it in an area where our workers live. So we said, fine, we will try it out there. And we did the first pilot in an area called Sanjay Nagar. It had about 1,300 households, and we had to convince these people who've been living there to agree to pay for a service that they really want. And we thought it's going to be very difficult. But the community agreed almost instantaneously. And we realized that there are these myths that, first of all, poor people don't want to pay. So we realized that anyone will pay for a good service. Okay? The second was that people wouldn't be willing to come together and do this because when you're talking about infrastructure, you can't do it for just one household. You have to do it for a large area. And they agreed to pay. What emerged was that they didn't have the mechanism to pay. So They had to pay something like 2,000 rupees, which is not a lot of money. But they didn't have the money they didn't have any facility to collect the money and then pay. So we started doing microfinance and cooperative and started asking them to save in small amounts. We collected about 25,000 euros, which in Indian rupees is 18 lakhs, which is 1,800,000 rupees, from these slum dwellers. And the government said, okay, so you've collected the money, but whose land is it? So we actually had to go to court. So it was not an easy thing. We couldn't just end up with it. So we've solved one issue, community's on board, we've got some money, the government's agreeing, but whose land is it? So we actually went to court, to the High Court in our case, and we fought on the issue that these were basic rights. This was a right that a person who comes into an Indian city, who's living in a slum, is not getting any basic services. And the court seemed to agree. So what the court did was give us something like a 10-year non-eviction notice, which meant that if the government was going to build this infrastructure, then for 10 years, nobody could come and demolish that structure. So it was a huge victory for us, and we thought, okay, problem solved. We finally we did one slum. Now, it took about a year and a half to get everything organized at the community end, because, roads were going to be widened, places were going to be dug, some houses would get cut. So it took that entire process, but it was all community-based. And then the government came in saying, okay, now we'll put in the infrastructure. Who is going to take care of the infrastructure? Who is going to make sure that the government didn't put substandard material? And we realized that most of our workers who work as masons, plumbers, carpenters come from slums. So they know what is good material. They know what is good quality of work. And we started saying that we need to create a cooperative. So we created a housing cooperative in each area that we did this project in. And they were the people who monitored the work of the government. There was actually a case in one place where the entire community made the government contractor stop work because they realized that they were using bad concrete. And it took a month for the government to sort it out, but they didn't let them move an inch. So we had communities actually getting feeling that they were empowered and they had a say in this process. Today, 45 slums. It's not a very large number, though it looks like 45 slums. It's approximately, if you take almost 300 households in a slum on an average, it's more and less. We were able to do 45 slums with the government. All this on government land. None of the other slums, which are about 1,170 in just Ahmedabad, were we able to reach out to. So this was a successful model. And if you can see behind me, this is a picture of a slum before and after. It's a big change. And we realized that, okay, we've given them services, and what were the services? So water in every house. Up until then, the government believed that you can just give them water, but they used to send tankers. And the tankers would be there for 1,500 households, just one tanker. So that means on an average, one person, or mostly the women, would spend something like 3 hours waiting in line for a bucket of water. Yeah? Which meant they couldn't send their kids to school, they couldn't go out and earn any money. And by the time their day was done, it was pretty late, so they didn't have anything else to do. Drainage, connecting their drains to the city, individual toilets in the house, stormwater drainage, paving of internal roads. So if you could see the picture ahead, that's an internal road, but it's been paved completely. Street lighting. Most women wouldn't go out of the house after 7 or 8 because it was very scary. There's to be a lot of robberies and kidnappings and things like that. Solid waste management facilities and landscaping. Unfortunately, the other two weren't as successful, the last two parts. The city managed to do something with solid waste management and daily collection, but in terms of landscaping and greening of the areas, we still fell short. We stressed that this was not necessarily only about infrastructure. It was not about just getting this hardware put in place. It was about people, and we wanted to make sure that it was a good process, that everybody felt that they were a part of it. What was the impact? After 2 years of the program, we went back to the same areas that we had done this in, and we realized a lot of things had changed. The first and the biggest impact was that the amount of cases of malaria, which were very high normally, had gone down. Women had started going, because they had better access to hospitals or to the road or transport facilities, they were going more into hospitals to give deliveries. That means lesser chances of infection, and pre- and postnatal checkups went up. So most women were becoming or being allowed to have more access to the other parts of the city because roads had improved, street lighting had improved. In education, we saw that most children were going to school. It went up to about 70% in terms of the enrollments, as opposed to it was about 30% before we started the project. So more children, including girls, were going to school. And we started having a lot of community members who were older coming and saying, we want to learn how to read and write as well. So we started an adult literacy program. The monthly incomes. So now a woman has more time, so she would start earning. Men had better access to other markets, so they started going out looking for work. In terms of occupations, from about 100% of people used to be daily wage earners, and they would do absolutely menial tasks if they got the work. And slowly, because of the fact that this program had started changing, that they didn't have to waste a lot of time on managing daily services, they started going out, getting training, getting a better education, and getting skilled to do better jobs. In terms of lifestyle, they started spending on TVs, refrigerators, things we take for granted. And they started spending on more consumer durables. People who used to have a bicycle started buying motorbikes so that they could go further away or accessing public transport more often. Electricity connections. Now, electricity is something we don't take for granted because it's privately owned in our city. It's not owned by the government. And I'll come to what we did with regard to electricity connections a bit later. Water supply, so hygiene, sanitation, all those kind of indicators started showing very, very obviously. And the most interesting thing was, in India, the government right now believes that you need to build a house for a person. You know, you need to build a house and you need to give them a house. But our experience says differently. You don't need to necessarily build them a house. If they have a structure on a piece of land, they will improve and spend on it themselves. We started seeing that people who had little shanties made of, tin roofs, etc., they started making permanent structures. And today, some of their houses are bigger than mine. But that was a really, really positive thing that happened. And we started realizing people are willing to spend on their own houses. It's not that we have to give them the money or they need to get some subsidy. They are willing to take a loan, to pay that loan back, and make sure that their houses are built in a better way. These are some of the areas that before the slum networking project. And these are some of them after. You'll still see that the goat is still there. But the goats are part of their livelihoods, and we believe that communities, especially those that work with livestock, should have space for those kind of things, even in an urban setting. And I'm sure all of you have heard the very stereotypical thing of cows on roads. So yes, they still are there. What was interesting is what happened after the slum networking project. We actually started seeing, first I think a sense of community increased. I think that's kind of pride that it's okay, we live in a slum, but it's fine, we have all the services. And there was someone who came up to us and said, now families who live in slum networking project areas will not marry their daughters into areas that don't have any of these facilities. So that was one of those indicators that we didn't expect, but we realized that everybody wants a basic facility, and people were thinking about the fact that if their daughters got married into areas which didn't have these, how would they manage? So we thought that was a very interesting thing that happened with us. But while we were doing all of this, they built their houses. Electricity was something that we couldn't access because it was very expensive. So you see, to get one electricity connection, you needed to pay something like 10,000 rupees, which is still a lot of money in India. And poor people weren't even being given access to it. One reason was that the company thought that these are areas where there's a lot of crime, and if they were to send their workers in, and the workers would get killed, and there were all these sorts of very Bollywood images of slums that existed even in the company's head. So the company, when we went to them and said that you should give them access, because people were, I wouldn't say, they were stealing, but because they were taking illegal connections off main connections and giving it, and there were cases of electrocutions and all of that. So the company said, okay, but we won't do the work in the community, you'll have to go with us. So we said, all right. There's an area in Ahmedabad. Now, if you know the history of Ahmedabad, we're a very communally divided city. And we had, in 2002, some of the worst riots that I think India or the world has ever seen, which was against one particular community, the Muslim community. Now, there is one area in Ahmedabad called Juhapura. It has about 500,000 people living there, and they're all Muslim. And the government has very clearly put them aside. So they're absolutely vulnerable and excluded, and they have just no option of reaching out to not-to markets. Banks won't give them loans. The government won't even respond to their queries. So we told the company, why don't we do this here? Why don't we give it to them? So they said, will they pay again? And because we were so confident that people would pay, we said, yes, they're going to pay. And we went to them and said, do you want electricity? And they said, yes. We did a survey to see how much it would cost them to pay the bill regularly. And it was something like 500 rupees in 2 months. And they said, we don't mind, even if it's 1,000, we'll pay. We want a fan because we have temperatures up to 45 degrees. So I'm not used to this weather. And for us to live in 45 degrees without a fan is crazy, especially for anybody. For children, they don't have electricity. So at night, a lot of the parents said, our kids can't study when they come back from school. So those are the kind of things that we realized that we wanted to change. And about 1,500 families got together, put together the money, and said, okay, here we are making the payment. Initially, the company didn't reduce the cost. They said 10,000 rupees, that's it, you have to collect it. So we said, okay. We got some funding from USAID, and the rest the people paid. And the company came in and put in connections. And they were so surprised that everybody was paying bills regularly. So what happened was that when they started paying the bills, the company said, okay, what other areas do you want to do? So they came back to us. So we started doing more areas. And after having done 3 or 4 areas, the company reduced the price for a slum dweller. So they said, okay, we won't charge you 10,000, we'll charge you 6,500. And they have now come down to 2,500 for a slum dweller. And they have set up a department in the company just for slum dwellers. So it's a separate department, it's a slum electrification department that works on electrification of slums. And what that did for a person was that it allowed the person to get an electricity bill, which is a very important document in India. You have an electricity bill that is proof of residence. So that was another project that we did, and we started realizing, and it was the first experience we realized that the market needs to wake up, that in India there is a huge potential to work with slums and give them services of good quality at an affordable rate. So that was our condition. The other 2 programs that began emerging were the urban resource centers. And the urban resource center is basically an information center in the middle of a slum. It gets access to information about the slum. It's run by the community. And it also provides people information about government services, private services that they can access, so that there's a lot of implementation of schemes that the government puts out, so people are aware and that they can make applications to it. And the microfinance. We realized nothing works without money. And you can make a lot of changes, but if you don't help people start saving and have something away for a rainy day, you're not really helping a lot of development happen. It's going to stop at some point. And we were able to start setting up with saving of 25 rupees a month. We've now grown to a cooperative of 20,000 members, and we have over 10 crore. I don't know what that in millions, but I think it's about $10 million. So we have 10 crores that people have saved of their own money and take loans as well from there. So these are some of the programs that have come up from an initiative that we did just with the communities. We work on community health. We have a housing facilitation cell because we've realized that people don't understand housing. It's a very complicated issue, and because they don't understand what it means, they don't go out and think that they can buy their own house. So they still depend on the government or on living in an area that they might just get evicted from. The Urban Resource Center has actually done a lot of studies for places like MIT and Harvard and other academic institutions as well that want to know what's the situation with an urban slum. We work on local governance through that as well. We have a large program that works with community workers, about reaching out to about 12,000 households. There's a lot of child labor in India, and we're working on helping children access education. The microfinance is completely community run. It employs about 100 people, and yeah. Women are 90% of the members. We also work in a rural area which there is cotton production that happens. Actually, the Swedish company IKEA realized that most of the cotton that comes from India comes from farms that employ child labor. And we worked for 4 years to help remove children from these farms.
Karen, I hate to interrupt you, but I'd really like to give you a very warm applause for your very interesting presentation. Please stay with us. I have to say I'm very impressed with the impact you just showed to us, among which on dynamics of the market of relationships and marriage. But I have some Albert-Jan Kruijter just whispered something in my ear that's quite interesting. I'll just give you the mic.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's very impressive. And compared to the UK and probably to Holland as well, you're upfront and leading us the way in how you contract market parties and how you actually contract government and how you actually contract the judge as well with this 10-year eviction and non-eviction notice. How you regulate actually these other domains in solving public problems, and I think there's a lot to learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we realize that our government is very keen on awards, and we kind of leverage that fact that the world's getting more inclusive if you start excluding people, etc. So they actually won an award for the Slum Networking Project. So we bank on something like that. Ego.
Before we go to the break, a very short reaction by Hetty Politiek from the municipality of Amsterdam. Inspiring story, I'm sure you agree. One thing that struck me is that Karen said that people, however poor they are, actually are willing to pay for good services. Is that something that is something that could inspire the municipality, or is it being done already?
Well, I think it's all about dignity and ownership. And the situation in England says about ambition, dignity, ownership. And in India, it's the same. And I think in Holland, we also try to shift our programs from top down to say how can we get more dignity and ownership of the poor people. And maybe poor is the financial poor people. And then when we have a lot of programs that said, well, you are 1, 2, or 3, and then we find that you're that kind of doelgroep, how do you say it?
Target group.
Target group.
And now we're trying to redefine what is the own dignity of the people who need government help. Where can they put their own power? We see the shifts, but it's also go very slowly. So.
Okay. You're really still looking for that urge also in this field, but you're really trying to empower people to do it themselves. Okay, yes. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your remark. My final comment is that we're going to a coffee break now, but make sure, if you want to hear more of both Steve and Karen, to join the afternoon session that Hetty is moderating about the impact van wijkondernemingen, the impact of the development trust. It's going to be this afternoon, so they'll be sharing their experience in more detail over there. So please make sure you join that if you wish for them to. Yes, please. And we're going to a coffee break now. It's going to be downstairs in the cafe, and I hope to see you all back at 12 o'clock. Well, let's say 12:05 to give you a bit more time for a warm cup of coffee. Thanks a lot for now.